this must have been a real intense project. And yeah, I'm just
Yes,
curious about its origins and how this all came about.
there is no simple answer, I guess, but the answer is it was from reporting. We were reporting. Zusha Ellenson is based for the Wall Street Journal in San Francisco for the U.S. News section. I'm based in Atlanta, and we were covering a lot of mass shootings. We kept running into the AR-15 as it was increasingly used in a lot of mass shootings, and we were paired together on a story about the gun and sort of the business side of the gun, the business aspect of how the gun industry sort of embraced it. And we found all this great crazy story going back to the 1950s, and no one really knew it. And everyone knows that symbol. Everyone knows that silhouette of an AR-15, even if they don't
Right.
know what an AR-15 is. Right? Everybody knows it. And if you put a bumper sticker on your car, or you carry a sign with a line through it, everyone knows who you are politically on the Second Amendment, and maybe on other things. They can derive how you feel politically. So it's this political chew toy that we're all arguing about, but nobody really knew the history. And we were fascinated about that. And I went to lunch with a guy I know who writes books, and he said, I think that's a book. So that sort of was the genesis of it. And I'd written an earlier book by myself on race riots in 1919
Yes.
that had country, and that was the same thing. It rose from every city I'd ever covered had a race riot in its history, and so I just kept wondering why did that happen?
It
So
was
that
about
was
the Red Summer. That was yeah. Sounds very
right,
fascinating too.
yeah. But it was also just from reporting. I mean, we run into things when Zusha and I would cover mass shootings with the rest of the media. We would be he was in Las Vegas, I was in Orlando, wherever we were. Eventually, the news cycle moved. You know this
Oh yeah.
more as well as I do. I mean, the news cycle moves on, the trucks leave, and
Yeah.
everyone's left with what just happened here and all the platitudes of insert city here, be strong or strong. That they're just left trying to sort of pick up the pieces of what happened. So, and then at the same time, there are a lot of people who really uh, not only love this gun but also love the image, want it to represent something about individualism and freedom in America, which is really isn't certainly what the inventor intended. But we thought it was just interesting to explore that. Obviously, it was a really monumental task to try to pull all this together, because we had to go back to the 1950s and cover up to today.
Going back to Eugene Stoner
Right.
and the West and him developing this, it sounds like
Right.
he was
Yes.
such a genius, and it was like he would never have envisioned this these many years later.
Right. But he was really sort of your classic American inventor slash hero guy. I mean, there were whole legions of these people in the 1950s who were sitting in their garages, tinkering or playing with materials to try to make things, to invent stuff. And he was one of those guys, except he was obsessed particularly with firearms, with how things that exploded. So from a very early age, he was blowing stuff up in his neighborhood and just trying to figure out how guns worked, how cannons could work. And he eventually ends up in the Marine Corps during World War II, where he is not in combat, but he spends a lot of time on his own looking at, particularly, I don't know how many of your viewers are interested in guns, but if you watch the movie Saving Private Ryan,
Yes,
Saving
yes.
Private Ryan, the soldiers are carrying this very heavy wooden. The American soldiers are carrying a very heavy wooden gun called an M1, which I have fired, and it's heavy, and you feel it on your shoulder, and it is a gun that worked very well for the American Army in World War II. We won, obviously, but it worked very well. But after that war, there was a lot of questions about whether America should have a lighter gun that could shoot more rounds. And this was something that obsessed the military, it obsessed the world military. The Soviet Union embraced a semi-automatic and an automatic and also could fire semi-automatic rifle called the AK-47. And there was a real sense within some of the military, an urgency to get a gun that was as good. And so that was perfect timing for Stoner, who had been working in an aircraft factory. Again, we got to start from the beginning. Like Stoner was not. He hadn't gone to college. He wasn't known. Nobody knew who he was. He wasn't. He didn't have any pedigree per se. He was just a guy working in his garage, and we described this in the book, through a series of lucky events, he ends up designing guns for this very small little almost startup, a subsidiary of an aircraft company in Hollywood. They started in Hollywood. And he brings to gun design something new, which is several things that are new. One is aluminum and plastics, which hadn't been used before in
Right.
firearms, hadn't been using those. And he is working in aircraft where that's all they're doing is starting to use aluminum to have planes go longer and higher and carry more weight. And he says, why don't we use these for firearms? Secondly, he redesigned, I won't go through the long story about it, but he redesigns how the gun fires and the parts that are needed to make the gun fire and reload.
Yeah.
And he reduces the amount of parts that are needed. And that makes the gun even lighter. And it allows the military purpose. One of the military purposes of that was it allowed soldiers, to go into combat carrying more ammunition. And I think there's this, it persists to this day, but there's this old military concept that people, that the soldier needs to be an expert marksman who can fire long distances with a heavy gun. And, they take aim and, that's that. Reports and research in World War II and in Korea by the military and others showed that, in fact, that's not how people fight. When you're in a battle, you're
Right.
pretty scared. And
You want to be accurate, and yeah, you don't want to get too close.
you're not concerned with the accuracy so much. You're just concerned with sort of firing in the direction
Yeah.
of where you think people who are trying to kill you are firing back. Like you're just scared because it's scary.
Yeah.
And so most soldiers were just sort of firing in the direction of the enemy. And so the simple adage, whoever has the most lead is going to win. So that was the idea. Those design and Stoner's gun, he developed several versions, several types of different types of guns, but eventually a general named Willard Wyman with the U.S. military comes to him in his little office in Southern California and says, I need you to build me a version of your gun that's smaller and carries smaller caliber ammunition. And this was another innovation that Stoner was developed, and it's counterintuitive. Like if I have a big gun and I fire a big bullet at you, you think that's that's worse than a smaller bullet. And in many cases, if it hits your head, it is. But if it hits your body, that isn't necessarily true, because the smaller bullet fired at high velocity hits your body, and then it spins around and splinters and goes all over the place. It's like a tornado in your body.
Right.
This
Makes
is
more
something,
damage.
yeah. And it's counterintuitive, but that is what Stoner developed and discovered. And so this is where this was this great innovation for the military. And everybody at the time in the 1950s, late 1950s, is thinking about Vietnam, because we all know, everyone at the time, and we interviewed people who were involved in a lot of these tests that the military was conducting, they're all thinking about Vietnam. And how are we going to fight insurgents, and how are we going to do it effectively, and what kind of weapons do we need? So that's really where the AR-15 develops, and it doesn't have an easy ride. I mean, it's very
Right.
the first portion of our book is really a David versus Goliath story, where this young unknown guy with his little company is trying to get a military contract. In his mind, he was a former Marine, so he was very patriotic. He's thinking this gun would be perfect for our military. It's also cheaper, easy to put together, carries more ammunition, easy to theoretically easy to clean. So why doesn't the military adopt it? Well, that's because the military had its own version, a heavy wooden steel version of the gun, and they were going to use that. And they wanted that. The bureaucracy was pushing for that rifle because it was made in-house. You know, it was
Yeah.
what the military bureaucracy, the Pentagon people wanted. So he meets all kinds of resistance, people trying to undercut the tests, distort the tests so that it looks like his gun is inefficient. Eventually, it gets adopted through a lot of really weird events. One of the things about this book that was, it's an important subject, and as you pointed out, it can be a heavy subject. But one of the things Zusha and I found out, he said it's just a fascinating story.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah. Dealing with the military. Yeah. Definitely. And
it's
they were
just
used to Springfield Armory. That was like, going back to
that's
George Washington.
right, exactly. But it was just a weird, like I'm sure you read John Wayne was the first person to ever shoot
Yes.
the who
Very
wasn't
proud
in.
of that.
Yeah, he just came in one day asking about it. There was this person named Air Force General named Curtis LeMay, who
Right.
was a character from he's a character from Doctor Strangelove, the guy who tries to blow up the world. This model
Right.
actor. He's cigar. He's everything you would think. Like cigar chomping. You know,
Yeah.
there's at one point he's smoking a cigar in the airplane in an airplane in a bomber, and
Right.
the
Yeah.
pilot says you shouldn't do that, General. It might blow up the plane, and the plane might blow up. And the general says it wouldn't dare. Like he was just this kind of like guy. He really plays a critical role because he was palsy with the head of the aircraft company, the president of the aircraft company, and they go out in 1960. He goes out to a birthday party for that person, and they shoot the AR-15. He shoots up some watermelons,
Yeah.
and they explode. And that he marches into the Pentagon the next week and says, "We got to start buying this rifle." And he really pushes for it. And so a lot of weird events take place to get the gun finally adopted, partially adopted, and then entirely adopted by the U.S. military. Importantly, they made some really critical changes. A Pentagon committee, as they're ramping up production of this gun, they made critical changes to it. So it's particularly with the ammunition. And that leads to a lot of problems for our soldiers and Marines in Vietnam early on in the combat because gun starts jamming and they don't have enough cleaning equipment. They haven't been properly trained on how to clean the weapon. And the propellant it hiccups the cycle of firing the gun. And when that hiccups, then you can jam.
Yeah.
And hair-raising stories. And I interviewed lots of Marines who were fighting in northern South Vietnam, where they wake up in the middle of the night, they're under attack, and their gun jams, and they don't know what to do. And they see their friends, they find dead bodies of Marines the next morning after the firefight, and there's guys with their cleaning equipment, like disassembled rifles next to them. It was really a terrifying thing that the Pentagon tried to suppress this news, but they were writing home to their families.
Yeah. Give us anything. Help us. Try to get these
Help us.
guns working.
Right. So that whole part of the story was really fascinating, and it required us going to the Smithsonian, going to the National Archives, going to presidential archives, and looking through thousands and thousands of pages of documents. But I don't know if you've ever done that, but it can be tedious at times. But when you find documents, it's very exciting. It's very, very exciting. So, and in the National Archives outside of Washington, you can't talk and you have to be very quiet. And I remember finding a document that showed that the military knew that they had a problem prior to them admitting that there was any kind of problem, and that Stoner had actually contacted the military and said that you can't change this ammunition propellant; it's going to cause problems. And having that paper, I had to rush out to the outer hallway and frantically call Zusha because I said, I
Amazing.
can't believe I'm looking at, and there were lots of moments like that. But no one had really looked at this story because it's become something we all know what that symbol means. We all know that people are arguing about it. A lot of people don't really, much of our country has no real knowledge of firearms and doesn't care to, and that's perfectly fine. And another portion of our country has at least a passing knowledge of firearms, at least of their firearms, whatever they own, and they don't really want to be told. They have their hackles up because they feel that everybody's trying to take away their firearms. So it becomes this thing where no one's really looking at really how did this develop, because we weren't always locked in this stagnant
Yeah,
battle.
nothing's going to get done. I mean, there's no
Yeah,
regulation to stop it. And do you trace through there? And I haven't gotten even to that section yet, where this jumps from the military to
right.
civilians getting their
Yes,
hands on this.
right. Because at first, so Colt was the first manufacturer of the gun, and they were making a lot of money because we were in the Vietnam War, so they were producing a lot of these rifles. Whenever they had any downtime on their production, they started manufacturing a gun they called the Sporter, which was basically the AR-15 for civilian use. So a military rifle, the military version of the gun, you could fire it automatic, which means you hold down the trigger and all the bullets in the magazine would fly out, or you could switch it to semi-automatic, which meant every time you pulled the trigger would be one bullet. You get better aim that way, and you can conserve your ammunition if you go on semi-automatic. Later, they added another mechanism where you could fire just 3 rounds, and then it would stop, and then you had to do it again. In the civilian version, it's only legal to have a gun that can fire semi-automatic. So that was what they sold, and it only had 5 rounds in the magazine, and that they tried to pitch it to hunters who were out in the outback, or people who were shooting varmints, gophers or feral pigs and stuff like that. And it didn't really catch on. And one of the reasons was the gun looked weird. It looks very space age. It's not made of traditional wood and steel that, a hunting rifle that people are used to, where you take one long shot. I was talking earlier about you have one shot, you take your
Right.
aim. That's what hunters do.
Yeah. Big
And
buck.
they don't, yeah, they're bringing down a deer or something. So they need a large caliber gun, and they want to take one shot because otherwise the animal runs away. They don't want to wreck the meat, like lots of reasons for that. But an AR-15 really doesn't work that well. And everyone thought it was strange. Plus, the problems that I mentioned in Vietnam left a real bad taste in with a lot of veterans. They hated the gun, and there was a rumor, which people to this day still think, that the gun was made by Mattel, the toy company. And so,
It would be plastic if it was that.
well, it was made of plastic and fiberglass and aluminum. It
Aluminum, yeah.
wasn't, yeah, and it wasn't made. It didn't look like your traditional
Right.
rifle. It was something from the space age. So a lot of the soldiers started grumbling that it was made by Mattel, and they're selling it. They're giving us a toy gun. It's not working. So that transferred to this day. Some people still think that. And after 1977, the gun went out of patent. That the innovations that Stoner had developed went out of patent, and some smaller companies besides Colt started to make AR-15s and try to sell them. And they would go to gun shows. We interviewed executives in these companies, and people would give them the finger and yell at them because they didn't want to see that kind of gun here. We don't want. That's not a traditional gun. That's not. What is that? Why would you want to fire that many rounds, etc.? So it really was a niche gun for a long time, and it really attracted survivalists and people who were trying to live off the grid, and then also extremists, people who were, whether on the left or the right, people who saw themselves going to war against.
Yeah.
Um,
Prepping for a supposed
yeah,
oncoming enemy, and you got to build
yeah,
a militia, right?
yeah. Whites. We found examples of white supremacists who had embraced the gun in some of their writings. Black Panthers talked about the gun. The American Indian movement embraced the rifle. The guys at Waco,
Yeah.
uh, that's why they went in there. Was the cult had been gathering up parts of the AR-15s. They argued they were trying to sell them, but the government thought it was a more sinister motive. So there were lots of the AR-15 was always on the edge of things, and sort of extremists and niche niche groups. That started to change in the 80s, and then in the late 80s, there's the Stockton shooting,
Right.
which did not involve an AR-15, but it was a schoolyard shooting in
Remember that.
California, and it involved a man using a semi-automatic version of an AK-47. But that shooting horrified the nation at the time and led to the beginning of discussions about limitations on these types of rifles, military style semi-automatic rifles, and whether these high velocity. And these are small bullets. With the AR-15, it's a small bullet, but it's fired at a high velocity. So
Right.
that's where it does its damage. But these after that shooting, a lot of Americans were very surprised that we had that kind of gun, that you could just buy it. People weren't really aware of that, and so there were some impositions, some restrictions placed upon that. Sales of AK-47s, importation of AK-47s by the Bush administration. There was increasing problems with gang shootings. There's an incident we write about in the book in which a police officer in Los Angeles was killed by an AR-15 by a
Hmm.
gang member, and that led people like Daryl Gates, who was the police chief in Los Angeles, to start arguing we need restrictions on these types of rifles because our police officers are outgunned. And George Bush hears that. That's again later taken up by Bill Clinton when he takes office. And then there's lots and lots of we go through extensively about what happened in Congress, but there's a real pull and push and tug over how is that, what kind of restrictions could we really place on these guns, and how would we impose that? We write in the book that ultimately that the assault weapons ban of 1994, which comes
Right.
along with a crime package, isn't very effective. And it isn't very effective because of the wording of the bill. It's a 10-year limit is placed upon it. And it's really, the gun manufacturers are all terrified. They think that they're about to be banned, but then they realize they can make a few alterations, get
Yeah. Get
approval from
around
the
it.
ATF, and they're back in business. So that's what
Hmm.
happened. Simultaneously, every gun owner in America was just told, you can't have that gun. So that, if I
Yeah.
told you
They
you
go
can't have a
crazy.
cup of coffee, you'd be like,
Right.
what do you mean?
What are you talking about? Yeah. This
What
is
are you
my
talking about?
right.
Right. So it becomes a political symbol. And that political battle in Washington, which the Democrats heralded as this tremendous victory, really caused them a lot of political defeat the next cycle, and then really led to this rifle becoming an important symbol for the gun rights movement and one that they fiercely fight for.
Yeah.
And simultaneously, the idea of a ban was kind of absurd because you could still just buy it. You could buy it. And then 10 years later, the ban is set to be renewed or sunset. By that time, we have a Republican Congress.
Yeah.
We have, it's also after 9/11. So
Right.
all all the stigma of the gun, which had lasted for decades in America. Even today, I've talked to Marines from Vietnam who hate the gun, but all that kind of gets washed away because of 9/11, because we're suddenly, all
Yeah.
Americans are seeing soldiers at our airports, at our railroad stations, overseas fighting in Iraq and Afghanistan with variations of the M16. That's the military designation of the AR-15, the military style AR-15, and other versions, smaller versions called the M4. And those guns are used, you know, and to defend us. So everybody's sort of kind of sales take
Yeah.
off, and then when the ban is lifted, sales skyrocket, and then we end up with the President Obama is running for office. Barack Obama's running, despite his very careful wording on the Second Amendment and gun rights during the campaign. The NRA is screaming, "This guy's going to take your guns."
Right, right. And people went out and just, yeah, the sales just
Sales
really like ballooned.
skyrocketed beyond belief,
Unbelievable.
and simultaneously, like I said earlier, many traditional gun owners wanted to see a wood and steel gun, and gun manufacturers, many of them, poo-pooed this little weird plastic and aluminum gun.
Hmm.
But and this is a key element about all this, is that all the design elements that Stoner developed for the AR-15 worked perfectly for what he was developing it for. For soldiers, American soldiers and their allies, to carry lots of ammunition and go into combat to fight these brush fire wars of the Cold War against insurgents, right? But those same design principles or developments were perfect for private companies, if the gun was selling well, to make immense profits, because the profit margin, it's really easy to make. You don't need some trained labor, who can lathe the wood and all that. You basically it's like Legos. You just stick them together. And so manufacturing is really easy to ramp up and easy to take down. And very quickly, the gun companies all jumped in. All the major gun companies jumped in because the profit margins were great. And a lot of people think that the gun industry is like big tobacco or big pharma, like it has tons of money and it's these giant corporations. It's really not. There's a lot of it has relatively small capitalization. The companies are not huge, and
Yeah.
it's very boom and bust. Guns are hot. The type of gun is hot, then it's not. Then a new one is, then it's not. So here was a gun that they could make a lot of money off of, and they all jumped in. And then they could easily ramp up production when something happened. So, for example, Barack
Right.
Obama's presidency.
Hmm. Yeah.
Then,
Yeah.
then we get into the sort of really ugly things start to happen with Sandy Hook, with Aurora, then Sandy Hook, these mass shootings. And then you start to see the same spike, because politicians start talking about gun control, and sales spike. So they start ramping up production. And it really is organic at first, and then it becomes part of the business model. And we spoke to a gun maker, a gun business owner who really, after Sandy Hook, he was obviously horrified by Sandy Hook, what happened there with the little children getting shot to death. But he was more horrified that suddenly this gun that he liked, which was the AR-15, he had served in the military. There was all this talk of banning it. And he's like, I didn't do anything wrong. Why are you going to try to ban my gun? So he just literally, at his bathroom, at his kitchen table in his pajamas, he went on a Facebook page and started ranting about it. And next thing you know, he has a business that's making a ton of money because he's selling stuff. Then he's selling parts, gun parts, badges.
Wow.
Then he's selling guns. And now he has a really profitable business selling AR-15s. And it's all stems from this reaction to Sandy Hook. And then there's more shootings, and politicians say X, protest, whatever it is, it sparks sales. So there's this massive increase in the sale of AR-15s.
Yeah, it's like the same movie over and over again. It's just you see it
right.
repeating every single incident.
But there's one other aspect of this is in the mid 2000s, these hedge funds start to come in. There's a company called Cerberus that comes in and starts buying up. They look at this industry as very fragmented, and the AR-15 market is very profitable but very fragmented. And if they can start consolidating, you can have efficiencies of cost, and at the same time, you can just sell as many of these as you want. Plus, traditional gun advertising was very my co-author calls it's like reading an IKEA catalog. It's very boring, and it'll just say
Sure.
traditional gun advertising was like, here's our new weapon. It has these specifications. Nah, 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 nah. The hedge fund guys were like, look, we're going to modernize, which of course in America means sex and so they started placing ads in Maxim magazine, which was a very sort of a young man's
Oh
magazine
yeah.
full of acts and drinking and partying and stuff like that. They launched this campaign that's now become infamous, where it was get your man card renewed, be a
Right.
man,
It's yeah,
right?
propaganda.
Right. Well, I mean, it's advertising, and it worked. I mean,
Yeah.
it worked on all these other things that I'm talking about. Worked to produce a phenomenal increase in sales. And before the assault weapons ban, the ATF estimated there were approximately 400,000
Mm.
AR-15 style rifles in the country. Today, this is extremely conservative. There's at least 20 million, maybe many millions more than that. We just don't know because it's not documented, but there's at least that many. That's from the industry. So we've seen this massive increase in the sale of AR-15s, and to stress, the vast majority of people who own those AR-15s aren't out to hurt anybody. They don't want to hurt anybody. As that company owner that I mentioned earlier said to me, if we were all psychos, you'd all be dead. So
Right.
most of them. I think he meant that to be comforting.
Responsible, but yeah, you got a certain
But
segment that shouldn't have them.
well, that's the point. So the issue becomes most people have their AR-15s for whatever reason, and they like to go target shooting, or they like to. You can change out the calibers now, so maybe they do go deer hunting with them or whatever. But the the truth is that with a country as big as ours, and with people with that many guns, that type of rifle around, again, it's easy to shoot, quick to shoot. Um, there's going to be some people who want to hurt other people, and they're going to use this gun because it's easy to get, easy to shoot, and it looks scary and it looks military, and that's what happens. And we see it over and over again. We spend a lot of time reading the journals and the writings of some of these disturbed people. I won't mention their names because it's not worth it, but they're attracted to this gun, and they go in. One guy was saying that he was getting sort of demonic messages that he had to buy that rifle, and because they all know it as it sort of feeds off of itself. And again, I can't stress how easy it is to shoot. I mean, obviously for the book, we fired the gun. I fired
Yeah.
other guns. That M1 I was referring to earlier. It's nothing to shoot an AR-15. It's very simple. It's very easy, and you can stay on target pretty quickly, pretty easily, and you can fire a lot of rounds really quickly. So the kid who opened fire at that school in Uvalde, in Texas, the
Right.
investigators said he'd never fired a gun before that day, and he was able to do that. And there was an incident in Dayton, Ohio, several years
Remember
ago.
that. Yeah.
That guy opened fire with an AR-15 pistol, which sounds like it's smaller, but it's not really. But anyways, it's basically an AR-15, and he started shooting outside of a bar. And there were police right there with AR-15s, with their own AR-15s. They were because it was a nightlife scene there, and they shot him dead within 30 seconds, and he still killed a bunch of people, and he
Yeah,
was
he
still.
had
I
enough time.
mean, you can. The thing is, this gun can wreak havoc very, very quickly. Again, the
Mm.
design principles that Stoner developed for combat make it incredibly. You can do a lot of damage really quickly.
Yeah, Stoner has
Anyway,
a fascinating story too. I mean, he was so consumed. I mean, it affected his family life negatively.
right? He was obsessed with the science of it, like that, the engineering challenges of it. He was to the point where we write in the book. He's writing on napkins and tablecloths at restaurants. His wife's smacking his hand. Don't do that. He's constantly thinking about it. If he can go to his garage and invent something, that was his version of heaven. And he never stopped. He let the AR-15 was the invention he was most proud of, without a doubt. Particularly, and I would stress, the military version. He was very proud that the military had adopted his rifle. He, but he kept inventing, all kinds of things. He was trying to make an aluminum house. Like, he was doing all kinds of crazy inventions up to right shortly before his death. He always wanted to be inventing, and he wasn't a person who sought the limelight. He was kind of a quiet guy. Later on in his life, a lot of these gun company executives sort of lionized him, and he always found it sort of embarrassing. He
Yeah,
wasn't his scene.
yeah. Do you remember the first mass shooting that you covered,
Well, I
or
don't
which
remember.
one was it? Yeah,
Yeah, I don't even know if I remember the first. But I mean, I've covered so many. I mean,
right.
not
Yeah,
all teams, but Charleston, Chattanooga,
yeah.
Orlando. Um,
Yeah, I was
you
there
know,
for
we
the Pulse nightclub shooting. Yeah, it goes way back.
I covered a lot of Las Vegas from here, because I don't know if you remember in Florida, his brother was living in Florida. The
Yeah,
shooter's brother was in Florida and was the first one to really, he talked openly to everybody, so he was there, and so I had to go down and talk to him. And there's a lot of it's something we're always, but there's been shooting after shooting in Texas, et cetera, and as reporters, we're always waiting for that phone call and hoping it doesn't come, because it's awful. It also is more complicated than simply like, oh, it's bad for me. It's you feel guilty because you just drop in and then you leave.
yeah,
And I think, if I'm being honest, that's a part of why we wanted to write this book. We wanted to understand how we got here, because we can't just keep on this treadmill of, oh, that was terrible. That was terrible. Oh, but you thought that was terrible. How about this? And also understanding that the two sides are yelling at each other all the time, and for people to argue for a new assault weapons ban is pretty. When you look at the numbers, it's pretty implausible that would ever happen, because there's so many of these rifles here now. Plus, we have the Second Amendment, and we have lots of there's. It's not this technology is here, and when technology comes, it doesn't just vanish because you don't like it. And I think the question becomes, how do we manage this technology? I think one of the big themes that came out of the book for me was how how little an inventor creates something, and then immediately he's lost control of it. And that's what happens with Stoner.
hmm
He has this. He's working for this little company at some of the best times in his life, and then boom, it's off, owned by Colt. The military makes changes. He tells them, "Look out! That's a big mistake. There's this disaster in Vietnam," and then the gun falls out of patent. He makes a lot of money in his life. We don't know exactly how much, but a lot. But the whole time, he doesn't has very little control over what's happening. It's just this
right.
technology is out in the world, and um, certainly for him he would be baffled by the concept of mass shootings, but he also would be baffled by the notion that it's this symbol of freedom against government. So, January 6th, as they were
Uh,
waving flags outside of the Capitol, two of the flags, one was the silhouette of the gun saying, "Come and take it,"
right.
which has become the rallying cry. And then another was a Confederate battle flag with the silhouette saying, "Come and take it." So he developed this gun for the U.S. military, for the U.S. government, because he believed in the United States government.
Right.
And so for it to be turned into this sort of anti government image symbol would be very strange to me.
Yeah, totally. Made it for the insurrectionists in the end game there, and it's just, astounding to even think that it got that far. But yeah, I just if you remember that shooting, I think it was in 84. I don't know if he used an AR-15. I think it was in San Ysidro,
Yeah, no,
California.
yeah, that was not an AR-15. And one of the things we found in our book that we discussed is that there have been mass shootings going back to here and there, going back to the '60s. The first mass shooting with an AR-15 that we found was in the mid '70s in Oregon. There was a guy who started shooting outside of a bar, but the gun, certainly in the last decade, has become very much the go-to weapon, in part because of this proliferation, this the widely available gun, that it's become the go-to weapon for people wanting to cause a lot of harm really quickly. And pulling that all together, we really tried in the book to focus on victims who survived. I mean, obviously, we wrote about victims who died. We obviously write about, but we wanted to stress victims who survived because they can tell us what it felt. And so we have a whole chapter on one woman who had over 60 surgeries after being shot
Uh,
twice with this AR-15, with these small bullets, and it's changed her life forever, of course,
yeah.
and she's with it to this day. And I think bringing those stories was difficult, obviously, but I think also, and then pulling it all together into a historical narrative, it was a lot of work.
I'm sure. Yeah, and yeah, you could just kind of feel that, just so heavy and so emotional and so much research, and what an
Yeah, it was.
incredible history. It just goes back so far. So yeah, it's just commend you for putting that all together. And it kind of does, it becomes that passion that you've been dealing with by working for the newspaper. So it's
Yeah,
just
we just felt like we had to tell this story, but also we got pulled. I said to the New York Times that it's like the Zelig of guns. I don't know if people remember that movie,
Zelig is a great movie, yeah.
but yeah, it just keeps coming up. General Petraeus,
Right.
when he was a young officer, he gets shot with an AR-15 by
Uh,
accident. He's shot in the chest. I mean, that ended up. I think it was a footnote in our book. But there's so many weird events where the AR-15 is there, and it's just become this ubiquitous movie. Rambo. It's in the Rambo movie.
mhm.
It's everywhere, right? So going forward, we write toward the end of the book about what some people are trying to do to make our country safer with this technology here, and there's some people doing some innovative things regarding red flag laws, which are laws in which people, if somebody's saying disturbing things online or with their families, that you can go to court and have their guns taken away
Absolutely.
temporarily. There are other things where raising the age limit might play a role in reducing some of these mass shootings, increasing security at places. We have to get away from the notion of, well, that's a Republican idea and that's a liberal idea.
Yeah. Yeah. We all lose in the long run with that too. It's just,
Oh,
you gotta.
yeah, I mean, one of the things I got out of this book was appreciating an engineer's mind, which, Stoner had this, like we were discussing, he had this mind where he's just constantly like, how do I fix those headphones? How do I fix those glasses? Like, how can I make it better? Right.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I don't think that way. I just am like, oh, here's some glasses, here's some, here's my headphones. I don't think that way, but he did, and
Hmm.
I really appreciated that mindset. And I think that this problem, which was created by technology, by people inventing stuff, is going to have to be solved. The problems we're experiencing with this technology are going to have to be solved with an engineer's mind. And also, like we're going to have to try things here, try this, try that, be very agnostic about what we're trying, try it all, see what works, and make our world safer because the technology isn't going away. It's not, you can't just, oh, well, okay, we're getting rid of AR-15s. And I think some people argue that that's an answer, but they're not thinking it through. They just are emotionally like that. I don't like that this is here. I don't like that this is happening. So let's make it go away. And that's not true. That's not realistic. I mean,
Right.
cell phones are here. They cause all kinds of problems, but we've had to manage that and try to manage it. And I think simultaneously the notion that, gun rights groups, some of the more extreme groups just argue everybody should have one. That's not realistic. Or that it's somehow normal that we have kindergartners going through mass shooter training. I mean, that's
Yes.
not society that any of us want to live in. And I think we have to find compromise. We have to find middle ground. We have to find different things that work. And if we do that, we can handle this new technology. But right now, we haven't really got a very good.
Yeah, that's so true. And then how about managing the black market? Who knows how much is out there? There are thousands and thousands. It's all here. You can't like go through and destroy every
Well,
last AR-15.
well. But I would say this is something we also found in our research. So, gun violence is a huge problem in this country, and the vast majority of people who are killed with handguns, whether it's suicide or a gang fight or domestic situation, whatever. That's handguns mostly. So we're talking about and we're talking about a different problem, which is mass shootings, and those are way less people statistically killed, numerically killed in those incidents, but they terrorize a community. So it's a very specific problem, and we also found that the shooters in most of these situations they went into a gun store and bought their guns absolutely legally because they didn't have a criminal record. Now in this country we have laws to make it illegal for criminals to buy guns.
Mm.
As we know, they still do, but those laws are in place to stop criminals. Mass shooters are often people who may have a long history of uh, mental illness and acting out and expressing urges to do violence, etc., but they don't have criminal records. They don't have felonies. So they go into the stores and buy them absolutely legally and walk out and do what they do. And we need to develop strategies to intercept those people.
Yeah.
And it has all kinds of constitutional ramifications. It has all kinds of civil liberties ramifications. But we have to start thinking that way, more strategically, more focused. And there are people doing that. We discussed that at the end of the book.
Yeah.
But I mean, I've been a journalist for a long time, so I don't think I'm a Pollyanna, but I feel that there are answers here that we can, if we think together and think hard about it, we can make our world safer. We can make this hopefully will be something that is not every 3 months we're having some horrible incident in our country.
Yeah. It's so true. So true. And you're with the Wall Street Journal these days. I know you from the AJC, but
Yeah. Wall Street Journal. Been there for 18 years now. But I did work at the AJC before that and loved it. And yeah,
and based out of here, Atlanta. So it's not just
basically,
covering guns.
no. I cover the South. I cover right now. I'm covering a lot of the Trump indictment stuff, but I cover the South. I go I travel around the South a lot, and I love it. Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, it's a great region to cover. I've helped to cover it quite a bit. I've been throughout all these states, Mississippi, Alabama, up through Tennessee and the Carolinas. It's just
Yeah,
it's exciting. It is. There's so many stories out there.
I mean, it's the fastest growing region in the country, and I really think that the future of America is here, and that is good, and that has lots of challenges too. I mean, look at the growth of Atlanta, look at the growth
Mm.
of Nashville, look at the growth of different cities, and these are, this is great, but it also comes with all kinds of challenges. And we've seen the political battles in Georgia, certainly.
Oh yeah.
Soon we'll be seeing those battles in other parts of the South as more people move down here. And yeah, it's a fascinating beat.
Never a dull moment,
No,
especially covering the stuff that's going to be going forward into the presidential year as well,
oh,
presidential election year. Whoa.
yeah, I'm gonna need some sleep before that starts. Yeah, yeah, but yeah. Any other questions?
That should do it, really. Seriously, this
Good.
is really fascinating. I really enjoyed it. And the book is great. If you can go out there and get this, get it wherever you get books. You can get on your Nook or Barnes and Noble, anywhere else. I just really, really thought it was, it's a really fascinating book. American Gun, the true story of the AR-15, and you co-authored that.
Yeah, with Zusha Ellenson, who's my colleague in San Francisco. And
Excellent.
yeah, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Take
Have a
care
good.
and best wishes going forward.
Thanks very much.